A widow whispered a dead woman's name in the frozen dawn, and with those two words, she shattered 4 years of silence and guilt. When Elias Calder found her barely alive beside his horse, he had no idea this stranger carried the truth about the fire that killed his wife. What he discovered in the ashes would tear open old wounds and reveal that the real murderer had been hiding in plain sight all along. Stay with us until the end and comment what city you're watching from so we can see how far this story travels. The wind came down from the Rockies like a blade. It was the kind of cold that made men stupid, the kind that froze eyelashes shut and turned breath into clouds of white ghosts. Elias Calder had lived through 17 Colorado winters, and he knew better than to trust the dark before dawn. But the horses needed feeding, and a man didn't let his animals suffer just because the weather had teeth. He pulled his coat tighter and pushed open the door of his cabin. The hinges screamed in protest, crusted with ice. Outside, the world was still black. The sun nothing more than a rumor somewhere beyond the jagged peaks. His boots crunched through snow that had fallen during the night, 6 inches, maybe 7. Fresh powder that would make the roads hell for another week. The barn loomed ahead, a dark shape against darker sky. Elias kept his head down and his eyes slitted against the wind. His breath came in harsh bursts, and his fingers were already numb inside his gloves. 30 yards. 20. 10. Then he heard it. A sound that didn't belong to morning. Not the creak of wood or the whistle of wind through gaps in the siding. Something else. Something human. A whimper. Elias stopped dead, his hand moving instinctively to the knife at his belt. Out here, 20 miles from the nearest town, you didn't take chances. Drifters came through sometimes, men running from the law or from themselves. Most were harmless. Some weren't. He approached the barn slowly, listening. The sound came again, weaker this time. Definitely human. Definitely hurting. He pulled open the barn door just wide enough to slip through, and the smell hit him first. Hay and horse and leather, familiar as his own skin. But underneath it, something else. Something wrong. Blood. And smoke. Old smoke, the kind that clung to fabric and hair and never quite washed out. His gelding, Solomon, stood in his stall near the back, ears pricked forward. The horse was staring at something on the ground near the tack wall. Elias moved closer, and his heart stopped. A woman, curled on her side in the straw like a broken bird. Young, maybe 20, maybe younger. Dark hair matted with ice and dirt. Bare feet blue-white with cold. She wore nothing but a thin cotton dress that might have been gray once but was now the color of ash. No coat. No shoes. No gloves. She should have been dead. Her lips were moving. Elias dropped to his knees beside her, his hands hovering over her shoulders, afraid to touch her, afraid she'd shatter like frozen glass. "Miss? Miss, can you hear me?" Her eyes didn't open. Her lips kept moving, shaping words he couldn't quite catch. He leaned closer, his ear near her mouth. Her breath was a ghost against his cheek. "Helen," she whispered. The word was cracked and broken, barely more than air. "Helen, forgive me." The world tilted. Helen, his wife's name, dead 4 winters, buried on the hill behind what used to be their home. No one spoke her name anymore. The people in town had learned not to. His few remaining friends had learned not to. Even he barely spoke it, not aloud, not where God or man could hear. But this stranger, this half-frozen girl bleeding in his barn, had just breathed it into the darkness like a prayer. Elias's hands were shaking. "Who are you?" His voice came out rough, almost angry. "How do you know that name?" The woman didn't answer. Her eyes rolled back and her body went slack. "Damn it!" Elias scooped her up, surprised by how little she weighed. Nothing but bones and skin and that dress that stank of smoke. He carried her out of the barn and back toward the cabin, moving as fast as he dared through the snow. Inside, he laid her on the floor near the fire, the only fire in the room, a small blaze in the stone hearth that barely held back the cold. He grabbed every blanket he owned and piled them over her, then put water on to boil. His hands moved automatically, doing the things a man did when someone was dying of cold. Strip off the wet clothes, warm them slowly, get liquid into them if they could swallow, but his mind was somewhere else entirely, Helen. He hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in so long that it sounded like a word from another language, a word that belonged to a different man, a different life. The life before the fire, before the screaming, before the night he'd come home to find his house a smoking ruin and his wife's body pulled from the wreckage, burned so badly he'd only been able to identify her by the wedding ring fused to her finger. 4 years ago. 4 years of silence and work and trying not to remember. And now this woman, this stranger, had dragged it all back with a single whispered word. He got the wet dress off her and wrapped her in dry blankets, his movements clinical, detached. Her feet were torn and bloody, the soles shredded like she'd been running for miles. Her hands were covered in cuts and bruises. There was a nasty gash above her left eye, crusted with dried blood. She'd been through hell before she'd ever reached his barn. The water boiled. Elias made weak tea, mostly hot water with a little honey, and managed to get a few spoonfuls past her lips. She coughed and choked, but some of it went down. Her color was starting to return, the deadly blue-white fading to something closer to human. He sat back on his heels and stared at her face. She looked familiar. Not in a way he could place immediately, but in the way a half-remembered dream looked familiar. Like he'd seen her before, somewhere, in another context. The fire popped. Outside, the wind howled, and Elias waited. She woke screaming. One moment she was still, barely breathing, and the next she was thrashing under the blankets, her eyes wild, her hands clawing at nothing. "No, please, I didn't mean... Easy!" Elias caught her wrists before she could tear the blankets away. "Easy, you're safe. You're inside. You're safe." She fought him for a moment, strength born of pure terror, and then her eyes focused on his face, and the fight went out of her all at once. She collapsed back against the floor, gasping, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Where?" Her voice was a rasp, barely functional. "Where am I?" "My cabin. 20 miles north of Granger Falls. You were in my barn, damn near frozen to death." She stared at him, and he saw the exact moment memory came flooding back. Her eyes went wide, then filled with something worse than fear. Shame. "You," she whispered. You're Elias Calder." He went still. "You know me." She tried to sit up, winced, fell back. "I worked for you, years ago, before..." Her voice broke. "Before the fire." And then he remembered. Mara. A girl from town, maybe 16 or 17 at the time. Helen had hired her to help with the housework when they'd first bought the old stage stop house. Mara had been quiet, shy, always watching from the corners of rooms like she was afraid to take up space. She'd worked for them for maybe 6 months before the fire. "Mara Fielding," Elias said slowly. The name tasted strange on his tongue, pulled up from 4 years of dust and darkness. She flinched like he'd struck her. "Yes. You disappeared the night of the fire. I ran." The words came out flat, dead. "I ran because it was my fault." The room went very quiet. Even the fire seemed to hold its breath. "What did you say?" Mara closed her eyes. Tears leaked from beneath her lids and tracked down her temples into her hair. "I caused the fire," she whispered. "I killed your wife." Dun. Elias stood up so fast the room spun. For a moment he couldn't speak, couldn't think, could only stand there staring down at this broken woman, wrapped in his blankets, and feel something huge and terrible rising in his chest. "Explain," he said. The word came out like gravel. "Right now. Explain." Mara was shaking so hard the blankets rustled. I was in the pantry. Late. I'd been organizing the preserves, and I lost track of time. It was dark. I lit a lamp, but the shelf, it was weak. I didn't know. When I set the lamp down, the shelf broke, and the lamp fell, and the oil..." She stopped, choking on the words. "The oil spilled," Elias finished, his voice hollow, "and caught fire." "Yes." It was barely a sound. "I tried to stop it. I tried to smother it with my apron, but it spread so fast. The pantry, the kitchen, the walls. Everything was so dry, and the wind was blowing through the windows, and I couldn't. Where was Helen? Upstairs. I screamed for her. I tried to get to the stairs, but the fire, it was everywhere. I heard her calling my name. I heard her. Mara's voice cracked. I heard her, and I couldn't reach her, and I was so scared, and I ran. God forgive me, I ran. Elias turned away. His hands were shaking. His whole body was shaking. 4 years. 4 years of not knowing, of trying to piece together what had happened from ash and charred wood and a marshal's half-hearted investigation that had concluded nothing. Accident, they'd said. Probably a lamp knocked over in the night. No one to blame but bad luck and old timber. And all this time, the answer had been running. You let everyone think she died alone, he said, and his voice sounded strange to his own ears. Distant, cold. You let me believe I'd never know what happened. I'm sorry. Mara was sobbing now, great shuddering gasps that shook her whole body. I'm so sorry. I've been running for 4 years. I couldn't stop. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face. Every time I slept, I heard her screaming. I tried to die 100 times, but I was too afraid. I was always too afraid. Elias closed his eyes, took a breath, then another, trying to find some kind of equilibrium in a world that had just tilted violently off its axis. When he opened his eyes again, he was calmer. Not calm. He didn't think he'd ever be calm again, but functional. Why did you come here? He asked. Why now? I didn't mean to. Mara's voice was weak, exhausted. I've been staying with a family in Blackhawk, working as a laundress, but a man came through last week. He knew me from before. He started asking questions. I got scared. I ran again. She laughed, a bitter, broken sound. I always run. I don't even know where I thought I was going, just away. The snow started. I got lost. I saw your barn and I thought maybe if I rested for just a few hours. She trailed off. They both knew what would have happened if Elias hadn't found her. The cold didn't forgive. The cold didn't care. You said her name, Elias said quietly. In the barn. You said Helen's name. Mara nodded, fresh tears spilling. I say it every night. I beg her to forgive me. I don't think she can hear me. I don't think God lets murderers' prayers reach the dead. You're not a murderer. The words surprised him as much as they surprised her. Mara's eyes flew open, wide and disbelieving. An accident isn't murder, Elias continued, and he found he meant it. The anger was still there, hot and sharp, but underneath it was something else, something that felt almost like relief. You were a girl. You made a mistake. That doesn't make you a murderer. She died because of me. She died because of bad luck and old wood and 1,000 other things that had nothing to do with you wanting her dead. Elias ran a hand through his hair, suddenly exhausted. I'm not saying I forgive you. I don't know if I can, but I'm saying you didn't kill her on purpose. Mara stared at him like he was speaking a language she didn't understand. You should hate me. Maybe I should. Elias turned back to the fire, watching the flames dance and twist. But right now, I'm too tired to hate anyone. Tralti. The sun rose slowly, turning the snow outside from black to gray to blazing white. Elias made more tea and a thin porridge that Mara managed to eat a few bites of before exhaustion dragged her back under. He let her sleep, wrapped in his blankets by the fire, while he sat at his rough-hewn table and tried to make sense of everything. 4 years. 4 years of grief and guilt and unanswered questions. 4 years of wondering if he could have done something different, been home earlier, checked the stove more carefully. 4 years of carrying Helen's death like a stone in his chest. And now he knew. A girl in a dark pantry, a weak shelf, a lamp, oil spreading across dry wood. No malice, no intention, just bad luck and bad timing and a moment of panic that had cost everything. He should hate Mara. Part of him wanted to. Part of him wanted to throw her back out into the cold and let the mountains take her. It would be justice of a sort. Fair payment for Helen's life. But he couldn't. Maybe because he was too tired. Maybe because 4 years of grief had worn him down to nothing. Maybe because somewhere deep down, he knew that Mara had been punishing herself far more thoroughly than he ever could. Or maybe because when she'd whispered Helen's name in the dark, something in him had cracked open, and the poison he'd been carrying had finally started to drain. Outside, the wind died. The storm was passing. Elias stood and walked to the window, looking out at the white world beyond. Somewhere out there, 20 miles south, were the ruins of the house he'd shared with Helen. He hadn't been back since the day they'd buried her. Couldn't bring himself to face it. But now he had questions. Questions that had been sleeping for 4 years, buried under ash and snow and time. Helen had been upstairs when the fire started. Mara said she'd heard her calling, but the marshal had found Helen's body in the hallway, near the top of the stairs. Like she'd been trying to get down, trying to escape, or trying to reach someone. Why hadn't she made it? The fire had started in the kitchen, in the pantry. She should have had time, should have been able to get out through the upstairs window if nothing else, unless something had stopped her. Elias turned back to look at Mara, still sleeping by the fire. Her face was peaceful now, younger looking without the weight of fear and guilt pulling at it. She looked like a child, but she wasn't a child. She was a woman who'd been running for 4 years from a truth she thought she knew, and Elias was beginning to suspect there was more to that truth than either of them had realized. When Mara woke again, it was late afternoon. The light coming through the window was honey gold, slanting, the particular quality of light that meant the day was already surrendering to evening. She sat up slowly, wincing. Every muscle in her body screamed. Her feet were bandaged. She had a vague memory of Elias cleaning and wrapping them while she drifted in and out of consciousness. Her head throbbed. Elias was at the table, whittling something. He looked up when she moved. "How do you feel?" "Like I died and came back wrong." Her voice was still rough, but stronger than before. "How long have I been asleep?" "Most of the day. It's near 4 o'clock." He set down the knife and the piece of wood. It looked like it was becoming a spoon, or maybe a ladle. "You need to eat something. I've got stew." "I'm not hungry." "You'll eat anyway." It wasn't a suggestion. Mara found she didn't have the strength to argue. She watched as Elias ladled stew into a wooden bowl and brought it to her. The smell made her stomach clench. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten anything that wasn't stale bread or watery soup. She ate slowly, one small bite at a time, while Elias watched from the table. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything that had been said and everything that hadn't. Finally, Mara set down the half-empty bowl. "What are you going to do with me?" Elias was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I want you to take me to the house." Mara went still. "What?" "The house where Helen died, where the fire was. I want you to go back there with me." "No." The word came out sharp, panicked. I can't go back there." "You can, and you will." Elias's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. "You've been running for 4 years, Mara. It hasn't helped. It hasn't made anything better. It's time to stop running and face what happened." You want me to relive it?" Mara's hands were shaking. "You want me to stand there and remember? I want answers." Elias leaned forward, his eyes intense. "You said the fire started in the pantry. You said Helen was upstairs, but something doesn't make sense. Helen was smart. She was quick. If the fire started downstairs, she should have had time to get out." "Maybe she panicked. Maybe—" "Helen didn't panic." The words came out hard. "Not ever. I saw her stay calm when a horse kicked through the barn wall and nearly killed us both. I saw her talk down a drunk with a gun. She didn't panic." Mara wrapped her arms around herself, pulling the blankets tighter. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I need to see the house again. I need to walk through what happened, step by step, and I need you there to tell me exactly what you remember." "Why?" The question came out as a whisper. "What difference does it make now? She's gone. Nothing's going to bring her back." "No," Elias agreed. "Nothing will bring her back. But I need to understand, and I think—" He paused. "I think you need to understand too. Because if you're going to stop running, you need to know what you're running from." Mara looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since she'd woken. He was older than she remembered. The years had carved lines around his eyes and mouth, had threaded gray through his dark hair. He looked tired. He looked like a man who'd been carrying something heavy for a very long time, just like her. "When?" she asked finally. "Tomorrow. If you can walk." "I can walk?" It was a lie. Her feet were shredded, her body was exhausted, and the thought of going back to that place made her want to vomit. But she'd been lying to herself for 4 years. What was one more lie? Elias nodded slowly, like he'd expected nothing less. "Then tomorrow, we go." That night, Mara lay by the fire and listened to the sounds of the cabin settling. Elias had offered her his bed, the only bed, but she'd refused. She was more comfortable on the floor, she'd said, closer to the fire. The truth was she didn't deserve a bed, didn't deserve comfort or warmth or any of the kindness Elias had shown her. She deserved the cold, the pain, the endless running. But tomorrow, the running would stop. Tomorrow, she would go back to the place where she'd destroyed everything, where she'd killed the only person who'd ever been kind to her without expecting anything in return, where she'd proven once and for all that she was exactly what her father had always said she was, worthless, careless, a burden on everyone around her. Mara closed her eyes and waited for sleep. But instead of darkness, she saw flames, orange and red and hungry, climbing walls, eating wood, turning everything to ash and smoke. And in the center of the flames, she saw Helen, not burned, not screaming, just standing there, looking at Mara with sad, knowing eyes. "Something is wrong in this house," Dream Helen said. "Someone watches us." Mara's eyes flew open. Her heart was racing. It was just a dream, just exhaustion and guilt tangling into nightmare. But as she lay there in the dark, listening to the fire pop and Elias's quiet breathing from the other room, she couldn't shake the feeling that dream. Helen had been trying to tell her something important, something Mara had missed 4 years ago, when she'd been too young and too frightened to see. She pulled the blankets tighter and stared at the ceiling, and for the first time in 4 years she let herself think back to the days before the fire. Really think. Not the panicked, fractured memories of flame and smoke, but the quieter moments that had come before. Helen in the kitchen, jumping at shadows. Helen locking doors that had never been locked before. Helen asking Mara strange questions. "Have you noticed anyone watching the house? Have you seen any strangers on the road?" At the time, Mara had thought Helen was just nervous. They lived far from town, and there were stories about drifters, about outlaws, about women who lived alone being easy targets. But what if it hadn't been nervousness? What if Helen had been afraid of something, someone, specific? Mara's breath caught. What if she wasn't the only one who'd been in the house that night? The thought was impossible, ridiculous. She'd been there. She'd seen the lamp fall, seen the oil spread, seen the fire take hold. There hadn't been anyone else. Had there? She thought back, trying to remember through the haze of panic and smoke. The pantry had been dark except for the lamp. She'd been alone, she was sure of it. Almost sure. 90% sure. Mara sat up, her heart pounding now. There had been a sound just before the lamp fell. A creak, like someone shifting their weight on old floorboards. She'd assumed it was the house settling. The old stage-stop house made 1,000 noises. But what if it hadn't been the house? What if someone had been there, in the dark, watching? What if someone had made sure the lamp fell? "No," she whispered to the empty room. "That's crazy. You're just trying to make yourself feel better, trying to push the blame onto someone else." But the thought had taken root now, and it wouldn't let go. Mara lay back down and closed her eyes, but she didn't sleep. She couldn't, because tomorrow she was going back to the house. And maybe, just maybe, she'd find something there that would finally explain why Helen hadn't made it out alive, why a smart, capable woman had died in a fire that should have given her plenty of time to escape. And why, 4 years later, Mara still sometimes woke in the night, convinced she could hear footsteps following her in the dark. The morning came cold and clear, the kind of crystalline dawn that made the world look newborn. Mara woke to the smell of coffee and wood smoke, her body stiff and aching in ways she'd almost forgotten were possible. For a moment she didn't remember where she was, and then it all came rushing back, the barn, the confession, Elias's face when she'd told him the truth, and the promise she'd made to go back. She sat up slowly, biting back a groan. Her feet were on fire beneath the bandages, and her muscles felt like they'd been beaten with hammers. But she'd survived worse. She'd survived this too. Elias was at the stove, frying something that smelled like salt pork. He glanced at her when she moved, but didn't speak. The silence between them had changed overnight. It was still heavy, still charged with unspoken things, but some of the sharp edges had worn smooth. "Can you stand?" he asked finally. Mara pushed herself upright, using the wall for support. Her feet screamed in protest, but she stayed up. "Yes." "Can you walk?" "I said I could." Saying it and doing it are different things. Elias turned back to the stove, flipping the meat. "We've got 20 miles to cover, most of it through snow. If you can't make it, tell me now." "I can make it." The words came out harder than she'd intended, defensive. She forced her voice softer. "I can make it." Elias studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "We'll take it slow. I've got boots that might fit you if we stuff the toes with cloth, and you'll ride behind me on Solomon. No arguments." Mara wanted to argue anyway. She didn't deserve his horse or his help, but she knew he was right. On foot, she'd last maybe an hour before her feet gave out completely. "Thank you." They ate in silence, the same thick quiet that had filled the cabin since yesterday. Mara forced down the salt pork and Johnny cakes even though her stomach was churning. She'd need the strength. They both would. When they were done, Elias pulled out a pair of his old boots, stuffed the toes with strips of wool cloth, and helped her lace them up over her bandaged feet. His hands were careful, clinical, but Mara could feel him watching her face for signs of pain. "They'll do," she said when he finished, though in truth every step felt like walking on broken glass. Elias fetched his coat and hat, then hesitated. "There's something I need to tell you before we go." Mara's heart dropped. "What?" "The house. It's not what you remember. The marshal and some men from town pulled down what was left of the walls after the fire. Said it was dangerous, might collapse on someone. Most of it's just foundation and ash now. A few burned beams, that's all." "I understand." "I'm not sure you do." Elias turned to face her fully. 4 years is a long time. Memory plays tricks. What you think you remember might not match what's actually there. "Are you saying I'm lying?" The words came out sharp. "No, I'm saying memory is fragile, especially after trauma. I'm saying whatever we find there, or don't find, we need to be prepared for it not to match the story we've been telling ourselves." Mara swallowed hard. "You think I'm wrong about what happened?" "I think we're both wrong about something." Elias grabbed his gloves from the table. "Otherwise, Helen would still be alive." The words hung in the cold air between them like smoke. Then Elias opened the door, and they stepped out into the white morning. The ride to the ruins took 4 hours. Solomon moved steadily through the deep snow, his breath coming in great white clouds. Mara sat behind Elias, her arms wrapped around his waist to keep from sliding off, her body rigid with pain and anticipation. They didn't speak. There was nothing to say that hadn't already been said, and the silence of the mountains demanded respect. Around them, the world was hushed and still. Pines heavy with snow, the sky a pale, translucent blue, the sun climbing slowly toward noon. Mara watched the landscape pass and felt something twist inside her chest. She knew this country, had known it once, before she'd run. The familiar shapes of distant peaks, the curve of the valley, the frozen creek they crossed twice. She'd traveled this road 100 times when she'd worked for the Calders, riding into town for supplies or walking home to her father's cabin after long days of scrubbing floors and mending linens. It felt like remembering someone else's life. Around mid-morning, they crested a rise and the ruins came into view. Mara's breath stopped. Elias had warned her, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality. Where the house had stood, the 2-story stage-stop house with its wide porch and stone chimney and windows that caught the morning light, there was now just a dark scar on the snow. A few blackened beams jutted up like broken bones. The chimney still stood, impossibly intact, a monument to everything that had burned around it. Elias reined Solomon to a halt. "You still want to do this?" Mara's throat was so tight she could barely breathe. "Yes." They dismounted carefully. Mara's feet hit the ground and she bit back a cry as pain shot up her legs. Elias caught her elbow, steadying her, but she pulled away as soon as she had her balance. "I'm fine." You're not, but we'll pretend you are. Elias tied Solomon to a half-burned fence post, then turned to face the ruins. His face was unreadable, carved from stone. They stood there for a long moment, neither of them moving. The wind whispered through the skeletal beams, carrying the faint ghost smell of old smoke. Finally, Elias started forward. Show me where the pantry was. Mara followed, her feet sinking into snow that covered ash that covered the place where she'd destroyed everything. Each step was agony, but she barely felt it. All she could see was the house as it had been, whole and warm and alive. She stopped at what would have been the back corner of the first floor. Here. The pantry was here, against the west wall. There was a door from the kitchen, and the shelves ran along. She gestured vaguely, her hand shaking. Along that wall, 3 shelves. The top one was where we kept the lamp oil. Elias crouched down, brushing snow away from the foundation stones. And you were organizing preserves? Yes. It was late. After supper, Mrs. Calder, Helen, she'd asked me to sort through what we had left, make a list of what we'd need before winter really set in. Mara's voice sounded strange to her own ears, distant and mechanical. I brought a lamp because it was dark, set it on the middle shelf while I worked. Then what? I reached for a jar, on the top shelf. I had to stretch, and when I did, I heard wood crack. Mara closed her eyes, seeing it all again. The middle shelf. It broke. The lamp fell. The oil spilled everywhere. The flame caught, and everything just exploded. Exploded? That's what it felt like. One second it was just a small fire, and the next the whole pantry was burning. The oil was everywhere. On the floor, on my dress, on the walls. I tried to smother it with my apron, but it was too fast, too hot. I ran out into the kitchen, and the fire followed me, like it was alive, like it was chasing me. Elias was examining something in the ash, his gloved fingers careful. You said you heard Helen upstairs. Yes, I screamed for her. I heard her door open. She called my name. She was... Mara's voice cracked. She was asking if I was all right. She didn't sound scared, just concerned, like maybe I dropped something or hurt myself. Where were you when you heard her? The kitchen, near the base of the stairs. I tried to go up, but the fire, it had spread to the walls, and the stairs were starting to catch. I could see smoke going up, and I knew if I tried to climb them, I'd die. So I ran. I went out the front door, and I didn't stop. I didn't even look back. And Helen? Mara opened her eyes. Tears were streaming down her face, freezing on her cheeks. I don't know. I heard her calling for me. And then I heard... She stopped, swallowing hard. I heard her scream, just once, and then nothing. Elias stood up slowly. In his hand was something small and dark. He brushed the ash away, and Mara saw it was a piece of metal, twisted and warped by heat, but still recognizable. A door hinge. The pantry door, Elias said quietly. Where was it when the fire started? Open or closed? Mara frowned. I don't remember. Closed, I think. No, wait. Open. I'd left it open so I could see better by the kitchen lamplight. You're sure? No, I don't know. Why does it matter? Instead of answering, Elias walked to where the base of the stairs would have been. The foundation stones marked the outline clearly. He stood there, looking up at nothing, his expression distant. Helen's body was found at the top of the stairs, he said. Right at the top. The marshal said she'd probably been overcome by smoke. Then why? Mara stepped closer, forgetting her pain. Why didn't she make it down? If she was at the top of the stairs, she was almost out. Even with the fire on the stairs themselves, she could have jumped. Helen wasn't afraid of heights. No, she wasn't. Elias turned to look at her, and there was something new in his eyes, something sharp and suspicious. She also wasn't the kind of person to abandon someone. If she heard you screaming, she would have come down, no matter what. Maybe she tried. Maybe the smoke was rising. That's what smoke does. The lower part of the house would have been clearer longer. Elias was pacing now, his boots crunching through ash and snow. And Helen was smart. She knew about fires. We talked about it after Old Man Crenshaw's barn burned down. She knew you stayed low, kept a wet cloth over your face, moved fast. Mara's head was spinning. What are you saying? I'm saying something doesn't make sense. Elias stopped pacing and looked directly at her. I'm saying if the fire started where you said it did, and Helen was where they found her, there should have been time for her to get out. Should have been time for her to at least try. Unless she was trapped. By what? The marshal said there was no debris blocking the stairs, no collapsed beams, nothing that would have physically stopped her. A cold feeling was spreading through Mara's chest, something separate from the winter air. Then what stopped her? Elias didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the chimney, the only part of the house still standing whole, and began examining it. His hands moved over the stones, checking for loose mortar, finding nothing. Then he crouched down and started brushing away snow and ash from the hearth. Elias? What are you looking for? I'm not sure. Something. Anything that explains... He stopped abruptly. Mara, come here. She limped over, her heart pounding. Elias had uncovered something beneath the ash, a piece of paper, miraculously preserved inside a crack between two hearthstones where the heat had been less intense and the snow had protected it from complete destruction. Carefully, almost reverently, Elias extracted it. The edges were charred and parts of the text were illegible, but enough remained to read. It was Helen's handwriting. Mara recognized it immediately, the careful, elegant script that had marked all of Helen's correspondence. Elias's hands shook as he read aloud. Mara is afraid but innocent. Something is wrong in this house. Someone watches us. I found evidence of entry. The pantry window has been forced twice now, though nothing appears stolen. I dare not tell Elias by letter. He worries too much, and I may be imagining things. But I don't think I am. I think someone means us harm. I think... The text broke off where the fire had taken the rest of the page. The silence that followed was absolute. Mara felt the world tilt. She knew I was afraid. Afraid of what? Elias's voice was sharp now, urgent. Mara, what were you afraid of? I don't know. Mara pressed her hands to her temples, trying to force memory through the fog of years and trauma. I felt like someone was watching me. Always. When I worked in the kitchen, when I hung laundry, when I walked back from town, I told myself I was being foolish. My father always said I was too jumpy, too scared of my own shadow. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was there, just out of sight, watching. Elias's face had gone pale. Did you ever see anyone? No, just sometimes I'd hear something. Footsteps when there shouldn't be footsteps, breathing. Once I thought I saw someone near the woodshed, but when I looked again there was nothing there. Why didn't you tell Helen? I did! The words burst out of Mara before she could stop them. I told her I was scared, that I thought someone was watching the house. She said... Mara stopped, remembering. She said she'd noticed things too. Doors left unlocked that she remembered locking. Items moved. She said she was keeping track, that she was going to figure out who it was. And then the fire happened. Yes. Mara's voice dropped to a whisper. 2 days after I told her. 2 days. They stared at each other, the weight of understanding settling between them like snow. It wasn't an accident, Mara said. Was it? I don't know. But Elias's face said he was beginning to suspect the same thing she was. We need to search the rest of the ruins, carefully. Look for anything else Helen might have hidden, anything that might tell us who she was afraid of. They spread out, moving slowly through the wreckage. The snow had buried most of the ash, and 4 years had scattered what the winter hadn't claimed, but they searched anyway. Mara's feet were agony, and her hands were numb despite her gloves, but she barely noticed. All she could think about was Helen's note. Mara is afraid, but innocent. Innocent. Helen had known, had believed her, and Mara had spent 4 years running from guilt that Helen herself had said she shouldn't carry. Mara. Elias's voice cut through her thoughts. Here. She hurried over to where he stood near what had been the back door. He was holding something, a piece of wood charred on one side but intact on the other. There were marks carved into the unburned surface. Not carved, scratched, like someone had dragged something metal across the wood again and again, making deep gouges. Boot marks, Elias said quietly. Someone stood here multiple times. The scratches are from the nails in their boot heels. Maybe it was you, or me, or look at the pattern, Elias pointed. These marks are all on the outside of the door. Someone stood out here, on this threshold, for long enough to leave permanent marks. And look, he turned the wood over. There are similar marks on the other side, newer, less weathered. What does that mean? It means someone stood at this door, moving back and forth, wearing down the wood, and they did it recently enough that the weather hadn't erased all the marks before the fire. Elias's jaw was tight. Someone was watching this house, regularly, and Helen knew. Mara's breath was coming fast now, panic rising in her chest. But who? Who would? I don't know, but we're going to find out. Elias stood, tucking the piece of wood inside his coat. Was there anyone who bothered you while you worked here? Any men who paid too much attention? Anyone Helen argued with? Mara tried to think back, but the memories were jumbled and unclear. There were always drifters passing through. The stage stop brought travelers. Most of them were fine, but some... She trailed off, remembering. There was one man. He came through maybe a month before the fire. He made me uncomfortable. The way he looked at me. Like he was cataloging me for later. Did he have a name? I don't remember. Helen sent him away without letting him stay the night. I remember that because it was unusual. Helen never turned away travelers, even rough ones. But this man, she wanted him gone. Mara closed her eyes, reaching for the memory. He was angry about it. I heard him shouting in the yard, something about disrespect, something about Helen not knowing who she was dealing with. Describe him. Tall, thin, dark hair. He had a scar Mara touched her own face, tracing a line from temple to jaw. Here. A bad one. Old. Elias had gone very still. Was he missing any fingers? Mara's eyes flew open. Yes, 2 fingers on his left hand. How did you... Reese Cutler. The name came out like a curse. Son of a bitch. Reese Cutler. Who is he? A trader. Moves between camps and settlements, selling liquor. Mostly illegal rot gut that blinds half the men who drink it. Helen... Elias stopped, his face darkening with memory. Helen reported him to the territorial marshal about 6 months before she died. There was a family, the Hendersons, who bought a barrel of Cutler's whiskey. It killed their oldest son and permanently damaged their youngest. Helen testified against Cutler at the hearing. What happened? The marshal fined him and confiscated his stock. Told him if he came back to this territory, he'd be arrested. Cutler left, but he made threats. Said Helen would regret crossing him. Said she'd pay for what she cost him. Elias's fists clenched. I thought they were empty threats, just a drunk running his mouth. I never thought... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Mara felt something huge and terrible shifting inside her chest. 4 years. 4 years of believing she was a murderer. 4 years of running and hiding and wishing she were dead. And all that time, the real killer had been walking free. We have to find him, she said, and her voice was steady for the first time in days. We have to find him and make him tell the truth. He won't confess. Men like Cutler don't confess. Then we make him. Mara stepped closer, and there was steel in her spine now, rage burning away the fear and guilt that had crippled her for so long. You said Helen wrote about evidence, about someone breaking in. Maybe she kept more records. Maybe there's something else we can find. Elias looked at her for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. Respect, maybe. Or recognition. Like he was seeing her for the first time, not as the terrified girl who'd run from his barn, but as someone with teeth. Helen kept a journal, he said slowly. She wrote in it every night. Small leather book, brown cover. I never read it. It was hers, private, but she always kept it in the drawer of the bedside table. Could it have survived? The upstairs burned hot. Everything up there was destroyed. But even as he said it, Elias was walking toward where the stairs had been. Though if she'd hidden it somewhere fireproof... They spent the next 2 hours digging through the ruins of the upper floor. The work was brutal, moving charred beams, sifting through drifts of ash and collapsed plaster, searching for something that probably didn't exist. Mara's hands were bleeding inside her gloves, and her feet had gone from painful to mercifully numb. But she didn't stop, couldn't stop. Somewhere in this wreckage was the truth. The proof that Helen had died not because of Mara's clumsiness, but because someone had wanted her dead. The sun was sinking toward the peaks when Elias made a sound. Not quite a shout, not quite a gasp. Mara scrambled over to where he crouched near what had been the bedroom floor. He'd uncovered a metal box, small, dented, its lock melted away by heat. Inside was a jumble of items protected from the worst of the fire. A few pieces of jewelry, some letters, and beneath them all, wrapped in oilcloth that had charred at the edges but held, a leather-bound book. Helen's journal. Elias lifted it out with shaking hands. The cover was scorched and the pages were brittle, but it was intact, legible. He opened it to a random page and Helen's handwriting spilled out. Familiar, beloved, impossible. Mara felt tears burning her eyes. What does it say? Elias flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning rapidly. Daily entries, mostly routine. Visitors, weather, household matters. He kept turning pages, moving backward through time toward the final entries. Wait. Here. 3 weeks before the fire. Listen to this. He read aloud, his voice rough. Cutler appeared at the door today, claimed he was passing through and needed water. I sent him away and told him if he returned I would summon the marshal. He smiled at me, that awful smile, and said, marshals couldn't protect everyone all the time. Said houses burn, said accidents happen. I locked all the doors after he left and checked them twice. Elias is in Denver for the livestock auction. I am alone here with only Mara. I should send her home, but I'm afraid if I do, she won't come back. She is already so frightened. She sees shadows everywhere. I cannot tell if I am making her fear worse or if she senses what I sense, that someone means us harm. The words hung in the cold air. Elias kept reading. 2 days later, I found the pantry window unlatched again this morning. I know I locked it. I checked it twice last night before bed. Someone was here while we slept. I cannot prove it, but I know. The whiskey smell lingered in the air. Cutler's smell. He is watching us. Waiting. And then? Mara's voice was barely a whisper. And then? Elias flipped forward one more page. The last entry, the day of the fire. Elias will be home tomorrow. I've kept all the doors and windows locked. Mara thinks I'm being paranoid. Maybe I am. But tonight I will sleep with the shotgun beside the bed, just in case, just until Elias returns. I pray I'm wrong about Cutler. I pray... Elias's voice broke. That's where it ends. She never finished the entry. Mara sank down into the snow, her legs finally giving out. She knew he was coming, and she tried to protect me. She did protect you. Elias closed the journal carefully, like it was made of glass. If she hadn't, Cutler probably would have killed you too. How do you know he didn't? How do you know I didn't cause the fire? Because of the boot marks, because of the window, because... Elias looked at her, his eyes fierce. Because Helen wrote that you were innocent, and Helen was never wrong about people. Mara wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him. But 4 years of guilt didn't disappear in a single afternoon, no matter what evidence said. Even if Cutler was there, she said slowly, even if he broke in, I still dropped the lamp. I still started the fire. Did you? Elias crouched down beside her. Think, Mara. Really think. You said the shelf broke. You said the lamp fell. But you also said you heard something just before it happened. A creak. Footsteps. What if someone was there in the pantry with you? What if someone pushed that shelf? What if Cutler was waiting in the dark, and when you came in with the lamp, he saw his chance? Mara closed her eyes, forcing herself back to that night, back to the dark pantry and the flickering lamplight. She'd been reaching for a jar on the top shelf. She'd stretched up on her toes. And then, a sound behind her, close, too close. She'd started to turn, and that's when the shelf had given way. But had it given way naturally, or had someone's hand helped it along? She remembered now. A breath on the back of her neck, the smell of whiskey, the sound of boots on wood, and then the crash of the lamp and the whoosh of igniting oil, and everything else had been consumed by fire and fear. Oh God, she whispered, He was there. He was right behind me. Are you sure? I smelled whiskey. I thought it was just the oil, or maybe I'd spilled some earlier, but it wasn't. It was him. He was there, and I ran and I left Helen. Her voice spiraled up toward hysteria. I left her alone with him. Stop. Elias gripped her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. Listen to me. You were 17 years old. You were terrified. You didn't know he was there. You did not leave her on purpose, and you did not cause her death. Do you understand me? This is not your fault. But no. His voice was iron. No more buts. No more guilt. Helen is dead because a man named Reese Cutler murdered her. Not because you were clumsy, not because you were careless, because a man wanted revenge, and he took it. The words finally broke through. Mara felt something crack open inside her chest. Not breaking, but releasing. 4 years of poison draining away all at once, leaving her empty and clean and utterly exhausted. She sagged forward, and Elias caught her, and for the first time since that terrible night, Mara let herself cry, really cry. Not the silent, terrified tears she'd shed in the dark for 4 years, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere in her bones. Elias held her awkwardly at first, then more firmly, like he was holding something that might blow away in the wind. He didn't speak, didn't try to comfort her with empty words, just held on while she shook apart. When the tears finally subsided, the sun was touching the peaks, turning the snow to gold and rose. Mara pulled back, scrubbing at her face with her sleeve. I'm sorry, she said roughly. Don't be. I got your coat wet. It'll dry. Elias stood, offering her his hand. Can you ride? Yes. Then we need to go. We need to find Cutler before he disappears again. Mara took his hand and let him pull her upright. Her feet were on fire again. Her whole body was trembling with exhaustion, but there was something new burning in her chest now, purpose. Where do we start? She asked. Elias looked out at the darkening mountains, his expression hard. I know where Cutler runs his operation. Deep timberline cabin, about 30 miles northeast of here, remote, hidden, perfect place for a man who doesn't want to be found. Then that's where we go. It's 3 days hard travel, maybe 4 in this snow. I don't care. Elias studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, but first we need supplies. And you need proper clothes and boots that actually fit. We'll ride to Granger Falls, stock up, and head out at first light. They walked back to where Solomon waited patiently, his breath steaming in the cold air. Elias helped Mara mount, then swung up behind her this time, his arms coming around her to grip the reins. As they rode away from the ruins, Mara looked back one last time. The chimney stood dark against the sunset, a silent witness to everything that had burned there, but not a monument to her guilt anymore. A monument to Helen's bravery, to a woman who'd seen danger coming and had tried to protect the people she cared about, even at the cost of her own life. I'll make this right, Mara whispered into the wind. I promise, Helen. I'll make this right. Beside her, Elias's arms tightened slightly on the reins, and together they rode toward justice. They reached Granger Falls just as full dark settled over the valley. The town was small, barely more than a main street with a general store, a saloon, a blacksmith, and a scattering of houses that looked like they'd been dropped randomly across the hillside. Lamplight glowed in windows, and wood smoke curled from chimneys into the frozen air. Elias guided Solomon toward the general store, which doubled as the post office and the only reliable place to get supplies after dark. The proprietor, a barrel-chested man named Kowalski, looked up from his ledger when they entered, his eyebrows rising at the sight of them. Calder, didn't expect to see you before spring. His eyes shifted to Mara, taking in her borrowed coat and oversized boots, the exhaustion carved into her face. And you've got company. Need supplies, Elias said curtly. Boots for the lady, proper winter gear, trail food for 4 days, ammunition, and a rifle if you've got one to spare. Kowalski's expression shifted from curious to wary. That's a lot of ammunition for a winter trip. I'm not asking for your opinion on it. The two men stared at each other for a long moment. Then Kowalski shrugged and moved toward the back shelves. Your money's as good as anyone's. Let me see what I've got. While Kowalski gathered supplies, Mara wandered toward the pot-bellied stove in the corner, her hands held out to the warmth. She could feel the proprietor's eyes on her, curious and assessing. In a town this small, strangers were noticed, remembered. By morning, everyone in Granger Falls would know Elias Calder had come through with a young woman no one recognized. Let them talk. She was done hiding. Elias joined her by the stove, his voice low. Are you sure about this? Once we leave tomorrow, there's no turning back. If Cutler's where I think he is, it won't be a friendly conversation. I'm sure. Mara met his eyes steadily. I've spent 4 years running. I'm done running. This isn't about running. This is about walking straight into danger. Cutler's not just a traitor. He's violent. He's killed before. The law can't prove it, but everyone knows if we confront him, we get the truth. Mara's voice was hard. And if he tries to hurt us, then we hurt him first. I'm not that scared girl anymore, Elias. I can't be. Something flickered in Elias's eyes. Approval, maybe, or recognition. He nodded slowly. All right, but you follow my lead. Cutler's smart and he's mean, and if we're not careful, we'll end up as dead as Helen. The name hung between them, heavy as snow. Kowalski returned with an armload of supplies, wool pants and a thick coat for Mara, boots lined with rabbit fur, dried meat and hardtack, coffee, matches wrapped in oilcloth, and a lever-action rifle that looked old but well-maintained. Best I can do on short notice. That'll be $47. Elias paid without arguing, which told Mara the price was inflated, but not worth fighting over. They loaded everything into canvas bags, and Kowalski helped them carry it out to where Solomon waited, patient as stone. As they were tying the bags to the saddle, a voice called out from the darkness. Elias Calder! That really you? A man emerged from the shadows near the saloon, tall and rangy, with a marshal's badge pinned to his coat. He walked with a limp, favoring his left leg, and his face was weathered like old leather. Mara didn't recognize him, but Elias clearly did. Wade. Elias's voice was neutral, carefully blank. Heard you'd become a hermit. Didn't believe it until now. Marshal Wade stopped a few feet away, his eyes moving between Elias and Mara with professional interest. You passing through or staying? Passing through. Uh-huh. Wade's gaze settled on Mara. Don't think I know your companion. Before Elias could answer, Mara stepped forward. Mara Fielding. Used to work for the Calders before the fire. Recognition flickered across Wade's face, followed by something harder. Fielding. Right. You're the one who disappeared that night. Some folks said you'd run off. Others said you'd probably died in the mountains. His eyes narrowed. Where have you been for 4 years? Surviving. Mara kept her voice level. Same as everyone else. Surviving. Wade repeated the word like he was tasting it. That's one way to put it. Another way might be avoiding questions about how that fire started. Elias moved, putting himself slightly between Mara and the marshal. She's answered all the questions that need answering. We both have. Have you? Wade shifted his weight, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. Not threatening, exactly, but not friendly either. Because I remember that fire. I remember pulling Helen Calder's body out of what was left of that house. And I remember thinking it was damned convenient that the only other person who'd been there that night vanished without a trace. It was an accident, Mara said, but her voice wavered slightly. 4 years of guilt didn't disappear just because you learned the truth. The shame still clung to her bones. Was it? Wade looked at Elias. You believe that? I believe Mara's innocent of anything except being young and scared. Elias's voice was hard as iron. I also believe the fire wasn't an accident. I believe someone set it deliberately. And I believe I'm about to go have a conversation with that someone. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Wade went very still. You got proof of that? Enough to ask questions. Not enough for the law. Elias met the marshal's eyes squarely. Which is why we're handling it ourselves. The hell you are. Wade's hand moved closer to his gun. If you've got evidence of murder, you bring it to me. That's how this works. The way you brought evidence 4 years ago? The way you investigated and found nothing and closed the case in a week? Bitterness leaked into Elias's voice. Forgive me if I don't trust the territorial law to give a damn about one woman's death. That's not fair and you know it. We did everything we could. You did the bare minimum and then moved on. Elias's hands clenched into fists. You didn't even question why Helen's body was at the top of the stairs instead of in bed where she should have been. You didn't notice the boot prints outside the back door or the forced window in the pantry. You looked at a burned house and a dead woman and decided it was easier to call it an accident than actually investigate. Wade's face flushed dark. I had 3 other cases that month. 2 murders in the mining camps and a stage robbery. I couldn't spend weeks combing through ashes on the chance it might be something other than what it looked like. It was my wife. And I'm sorry for that, I am. But being sorry doesn't change the facts. We didn't have evidence of foul play. We didn't have witnesses. We didn't have anything except a burned house and your testimony that Helen had been alone. She wasn't alone. Mara's voice cut through the tension. Both men turned to look at her. I was there, and so was someone else. Wade's expression shifted. Someone else. Reese Cutler. The name felt like poison on her tongue. He was there that night, in the house. I didn't realize it at the time, but I do now. He was in the pantry when the fire started. He caused it, and then he left Helen to die. The marshal was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, very carefully, "That's a serious accusation, Miss Fielding, especially coming from someone who's been missing for 4 years. I'm not missing anymore." "No, you're not." Wade looked between them again, his jaw working. "And now you're planning to ride up into the mountains to confront a dangerous man based on 4-year-old memories and what? A hunch? A feeling?" "We have Helen's journal," Elias said. "She documented Cutler's threats, his visits, the break-ins, everything." That stopped Wade cold. "You have evidence? Physical evidence?" "Yes." "Then bring it to me. Let me handle this properly. Get a warrant, arrest him, try him in a court of law." "And how long will that take?" Elias's voice was bitter. "How many weeks of filing paperwork and waiting for judges? And what happens if Cutler hears we're coming? What happens if he runs before you can arrest him?" "Then we track him down. The way you tracked down the men who robbed the stage last year? The way you found whoever killed the Henderson boy?" Elias shook his head. "No, I'm not waiting for the law to maybe possibly do something eventually. I'm going to get answers now." Wade's hand was definitely on his gun now. "I can't let you do that, Calder. If you go after Cutler, it's not justice. It's revenge. And revenge gets people killed." "Good." The word hung in the frozen air like a challenge. The marshal's eyes went hard. "That's far enough. You're talking about murder now. And I don't care how much you've lost. I won't let you throw your life away on a vendetta." "Then arrest me." Elias spread his hands. "Right now. Arrest me for a crime I haven't committed yet. Put me in a cell and explain to the territory why you're holding a man who just wants to ask questions about his wife's death." Wade's face worked. He was trapped, and he knew it. Arresting Elias would cause a scandal. A widower seeking answers about his dead wife was sympathetic. A marshal stopping him from getting those answers was not. But letting them go meant potentially watching 2 people ride to their deaths. Finally, Wade stepped back. 24 hours. I'm giving you 24 hours to come back here with that journal and any other evidence you've got. If you're not back by then, I'm coming after you. And if I find Cutler dead, I'm arresting you for murder. Do you understand me?" "Perfectly." "Miss Fielding." Wade turned to Mara. "You're a witness to this conversation. You heard me tell him not to do this. Whatever happens up in those mountains, it's on him, not you. You can still walk away." Mara looked at Elias, then back at the marshal. "I'm not walking away." Wade sighed, and suddenly he looked old, tired. "Then God help you both." He turned and limped back toward the saloon, disappearing into the shadows. Mara let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "He's going to follow us, isn't he?" "Probably." Elias finished securing the supply bags. "But we'll have a head start, and we know the country better than he does. We'll be fine, will we?" Elias looked at her, and for the first time since they'd left the ruins, she saw real uncertainty in his eyes. "I don't know. But we're past the point of turning back now." They mounted Solomon and rode out of Granger Falls without looking back. Behind them, lamplight flickered in windows and voices murmured in the saloon. Normal life, carrying on. People eating and drinking and sleeping, unaware that two strangers were riding into the darkness to confront a killer. Mara wondered if she'd ever have a normal life again, if there was any coming back from what they were about to do. Then she thought of Helen, dying alone in the smoke and flames while Cutler escaped into the night. Thought of 4 years spent running from a guilt that had never been hers to carry. Thought of all the other women Cutler might have hurt since then, all the other lives he might have destroyed. And she knew there was no going back, only forward, into the mountains, into the dark, into whatever waited at the end of this road. They rode through the night, following trails that Elias knew by heart, even in darkness. The moon rose late, casting silver light across the snow, turning the world into something out of a dream, beautiful and strange and utterly inhospitable to human life. Twice they stopped to rest Solomon and share jerky and cold water. Neither of them spoke much. There was nothing left to say. By dawn, they were deep in the high country, following a frozen creek upstream toward the timberline. The trees here were twisted and stunted, shaped by constant wind into tortured forms. Snow lay thick on the ground, unmarked except for animal tracks, elk, deer, the occasional mountain lion. "How much farther?" Mara asked. Her voice was hoarse from cold and exhaustion. 3, maybe 4 hours. Elias pointed toward a distant ridge. His cabin's on the far side of that, in a box canyon with only one way in or out. Defensible. Private. Perfect place for a man who doesn't want visitors. And we're just going to ride up and knock on the door? More or less. That's insane. You have a better idea? Mara thought about it. No. Then insane is what we've got. Elias urged Solomon forward. Stay alert. If Cutler's got any sense, he'll have someone watching the approaches. They climbed higher, following the creek as it narrowed and steepened. The air was thin here, hard to breathe, and every inhalation burned like fire. Mara's feet had gone numb again, which was probably a blessing. She couldn't feel the pain anymore, just a distant awareness that something was wrong. The sun climbed toward noon. They stopped once more to let Solomon drink from a spring that bubbled up from beneath the snow, impossibly clear and cold. Elias checked the rifle, making sure it was loaded and ready. His hands were steady, his face calm. But Mara could see the tension in the set of his shoulders, the way his eyes constantly scanned the trees around them. He was afraid. Not of dying. She didn't think Elias feared death much anymore, but of failing. Of coming this close to the truth only to lose it again. Whatever happens, Mara said quietly, thank you. Elias looked at her. For what? For believing me. For not throwing me out into the snow. For... She struggled to find words. For giving me a reason to stop running. Something softened in Elias's expression. You gave me a reason too. I've been just as lost as you, Mara. Just better at pretending otherwise. And if we don't make it back from this, then at least we'll go down fighting. He managed a thin smile. Better than dying alone in a cabin, waiting for nothing. They remounted and continued climbing. The ridge loomed ahead, jagged and white against the blue sky. Another hour, maybe less. And then, from somewhere ahead, came the crack of a gunshot. Solomon reared, startled. Elias fought to keep him under control while simultaneously reaching for the rifle. A second shot rang out, closer this time, and snow erupted from a tree trunk 3 feet to their left. Get down! Elias threw himself from the saddle, dragging Mara with him. They hit the ground hard, rolling behind a fallen log as a third shot kicked up snow where they'd been standing. Where is he? Mara gasped, trying to see through the trees. Up the ridge, maybe 200 yards. Elias had the rifle up, scanning for the shooter. He's not trying to kill us. If he were, we'd already be dead. He's warning us off. Is it Cutler? Don't know. Could be one of his men. Another shot rang out, this one hitting the log they were hiding behind. He's giving us a choice, turn back or die. Mara looked at Elias. We're not turning back. No, we're not. Elias took a breath, then shouted into the trees. Cutler, I know you're up there. I just want to talk. Silence. Then a voice drifted down, rough and mocking. Ain't nothing to talk about, Calder. You and your whore should have stayed home. Rage flashed through Elias's eyes. I've got proof you killed my wife. Proof the marshal will believe. You can talk to me or you can talk to a noose. Your choice. Another silence, longer this time. Mara could hear her own heartbeat, loud in her ears, could feel the cold seeping up through the snow into her bones. Then the voice again, closer now. What kind of proof? Helen's journal. She wrote about you, about your threats, about how you broke into our house. Elias was still scanning the trees, trying to locate the source of the voice. She knew you were coming. She documented everything. Bullshit. That journal burned with her. Most of it did. Not all. Elias's voice was steady, confident. Enough survived. Enough to hang you. Unless you've got a better explanation for why you were at my house the night of the fire. The silence stretched so long Mara thought maybe Cutler had run. Then she heard it. The crunch of boots on snow moving down the ridge toward them. Not trying to hide anymore. Elias tensed, bringing the rifle to his shoulder. A figure emerged from the trees 30 yards upslope. Tall, thin, exactly as Mara remembered from that night 4 years ago. Dark hair, gaunt face, and a scar running from temple to jaw like someone had tried to carve him open and failed. He had a rifle in his hands, pointed casually in their direction. Not quite aimed, but ready. Reese Cutler looked at them with eyes like chips of dirty ice and smiled. Well now, little Mara Fielding, thought you'd frozen to death years ago. The sound of his voice sent ice through Mara's veins. She remembered that voice. Remembered it laughing as flames climbed the walls. Remembered it saying something she hadn't understood at the time. Something that now made terrible sense. Told you she'd pay for crossing me. Told you all. You murdered my wife, Elias said. Each word was carved from stone. Say it. Cutler's smile widened. Can't murder what don't matter. She was just a woman. They're all just women. Easy to break, easy to burn. Elias fired. The shot went wide. Deliberately, Mara thought, hitting a tree 6 inches from Cutler's head. The message was clear. Next one wouldn't miss. But Cutler just laughed. That's supposed to scare me? I've been shot at by better men than you, Calder. Takes more than threats to... I found her body, Elias interrupted. His voice was quiet now, deadly. The marshal said she died of smoke. But I saw her hands. I saw the bruises on her throat. Someone strangled her before the fire even reached the second floor. Someone made sure she couldn't escape. Was that you? Did you put your hands around her neck and squeeze while she begged for her life? Something flickered in Cutler's expression. Not guilt. Mara didn't think he was capable of that. But calculation. Like he was weighing whether the truth would help or hurt him. She fought, he said finally. Harder than I expected. But women always stop fighting eventually. They all do. The confession hung in the cold air like smoke. Elias stood slowly, the rifle still aimed at Cutler's chest. Thank you. That's all I needed to hear. That's supposed to mean something? Cutler laughed again. You think you're going to march me down to the marshal? Tell your little story? Even if Wade believes you, which he won't, I'll be gone before he gets a warrant together. I'm always gone. That's how I've stayed free all these years. Ghost in the mountains. Here one day, gone the next. I'm not taking you to the marshal, Elias said. Understanding dawned in Cutler's eyes. He started to bring his rifle up, but Elias was faster. The shot caught Cutler in the shoulder, spinning him around. His rifle went flying into the snow. Mara watched as Cutler staggered, clutching his shoulder. Blood welled between his fingers, shocking red against the white snow. He dropped to his knees, gasping. You shot me, he said, like he couldn't quite believe it. You actually shot me. Yes. Elias walked forward, the rifle never wavering. And I'm going to keep shooting until you tell me exactly what happened that night. Every detail. Every moment. Go to hell! Elias shot him in the leg. Cutler screamed, a high animal sound that echoed off the mountains. He collapsed sideways, writhing in the snow. You're crazy! You're insane! I'm grief. Elias stood over him, cold and terrible as winter. Tell me what happened. I already told you. Cutler's voice was ragged with pain. I killed her. I strangled her and left her in the flames. Is that what you want to hear? Why? Because she deserved it. She cost me everything. My business, my reputation, my freedom, all because of her testimony. She had to pay. How did you get in the house? The pantry window? I'd been watching for weeks. I knew her patterns, knew when she'd be alone. Blood was spreading across the snow beneath Cutler now, dark and viscous. I waited until the girl went in with the lamp, then I followed, pushed the shelf so the lamp would fall. Knew the fire would spread fast in that old tinderbox. And Helen? Heard her coming down the stairs, met her at the top. She tried to scream, but He coughed, and blood flecked his lips. I made sure she didn't, made sure she couldn't warn anyone. Then I left through the back door while the fire did the rest. Mara felt tears streaming down her face, but she couldn't look away. Couldn't stop listening to the terrible truth she'd spent 4 years running from. You let everyone think it was an accident, Elias said. Let them think Mara caused it. So? Cutler laughed wetly. What's one girl's guilt compared to my freedom? She was nothing, just like Helen was nothing, just like your... He never finished the sentence. Elias shot him through the heart. The sound echoed across the mountains, rolling like thunder. Birds erupted from the trees, their wings dark against the sky. And Reese Cutler collapsed into the snow and didn't move again. Mara stood frozen, unable to process what she'd just witnessed. Elias had killed him, had executed him right there in the snow without hesitation, without remorse. It should have horrified her, should have terrified her. Instead, she felt nothing but a vast, hollow relief. It was over. Elias lowered the rifle slowly. His hands were shaking now, the adrenaline finally hitting. He stared down at Cutler's body for a long moment, then turned away. We need to go. What about? Mara gestured at the corpse. Leave him. The wolves will take care of it. Elias was already walking back to where Solomon waited, somehow still calm despite the gunfire. We need to get back to Granger Falls before Wade comes looking. But you killed him. I know what I did. Elias's voice was flat, and I'll deal with the consequences. But right now, we need to move. Mara took one last look at Cutler, at the man who destroyed so many lives, lying motionless in the snow. Then she turned and followed Elias down the mountain. They rode hard, pushing Solomon as fast as they dared through the deep snow. Neither of them spoke. There was too much to say and no way to say any of it. The sun tracked across the sky, brilliant and cold, offering light but no warmth. It was late afternoon when they finally descended back into the valley. Granger Falls appeared in the distance, smoke rising from chimneys, life continuing as it always did, as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Elias reined Solomon to a stop just outside town. You should know, Wade's probably going to arrest me. What I did up there, it wasn't legal, it wasn't justice, it was murder. It was justice, Mara said firmly. Maybe not legal justice, but justice all the same. The law won't see it that way. Then I'll tell them the truth. That Cutler confessed, that he tried to kill us, that you defended us both. That's not what happened. Close enough. Mara met his eyes. You saved my life, Elias, more than once. You gave me back 4 years I thought I'd lost. Whatever happens now, I'm not letting them hang you for doing what was right. Something like gratitude flickered across Elias's face. Then he nodded and urged Solomon forward into town. Marshal Wade was waiting for them in front of his office, arms crossed, face grim. Where is he? Dead, Elias said simply. About 30 miles northeast, in a box canyon near the timberline. Wade's jaw tightened. You killed him. He confessed to murdering Helen, confessed to setting the fire. Then he tried to kill us. Elias dismounted, moving like his bones ached. I defended myself in Miss Fielding. That's what happened. Is it? Wade looked at Mara. That true, miss? Mara climbed down from the saddle, her legs barely holding her. Every word. Cutler admitted everything. He strangled Helen and left her in the fire. He would have done the same to us if Elias hadn't stopped him. Wade studied them both for a long moment. Then he sighed. I suppose I'll have to ride up there, confirm the body, get statements. He paused. This is going to be a mess, you know. Territorial law doesn't take kindly to vigilante justice. I know. Elias handed over the rifle. But it's done. Wade took the rifle, then surprised them both by extending his hand. For what it's worth, I'm sorry I didn't investigate properly 4 years ago. Maybe if I had, none of this would have been necessary. Elias gripped his hand briefly. Maybe. Or maybe it would have happened anyway. Some men are born to hang. Cutler was one of them. They left Wade standing in the street and walked Solomon toward the livery. Mara felt like she was moving through water, everything slow and dreamlike. Her body was shutting down, exhaustion finally catching up with 4 days of pain and fear and grief. At the livery, Elias paid for Solomon's care, then turned to Mara. There's a boarding house at the end of Main Street. Clean beds, hot food. You should rest. What about you? I'll be fine. Elias. She caught his arm. What about you? He looked at her, and she saw it then. The bone-deep exhaustion that matched her own. The weight of what he'd done settling onto his shoulders. The understanding that he'd crossed a line and there was no going back. I don't know, he said quietly. I need to be alone for a while. Figure out what comes next. Mara wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he didn't have to carry this alone. But she could see he needed space, needed time to process what had happened on that mountain. So she nodded. I'll be at the boarding house when you're ready. Thank you. He touched her shoulder briefly, a ghost of contact. Then he turned and walked away into the gathering dusk. Mara stood there for a long moment, watching him go. Then she walked toward the boarding house, toward warmth and rest and the strange, uncertain future that waited beyond the morning. It was over. 4 years of running, 4 years of guilt. Finally, completely, irrevocably over. But as Mara climbed the steps of the boarding house and pushed open the door, she realized that endings and beginnings were sometimes the same thing. And what came next, whatever came next, she and Elias would face it together. Or not at all. The boarding house room was small and spare. A narrow bed, a washstand with a chipped basin, a single window that looked out onto the darkening street. But to Mara, it felt like luxury. The mattress was soft, the blankets were clean, and for the first time in 4 years she could close her eyes without seeing flames. She stripped off the borrowed clothes, washed as best she could with cold water from the basin, and crawled into bed wearing the cotton shift the landlady had provided. Her feet throbbed beneath fresh bandages, her muscles screamed, and her mind was a jumble of images she couldn't quite sort into order. Cutler's face, the blood in the snow, Elias's steady hand on the rifle. The moment when justice and murder had become the same thing. She expected nightmares, expected to lie awake replaying everything that had happened. Instead, sleep took her like a wave, sudden and complete, dragging her down into darkness so deep she didn't even dream. When she woke, pale sunlight was streaming through the window, and someone was knocking on her door. Miss Fielding, you awake? The landlady's voice, tentative. There's a gentleman asking for you. Says his name's Calder. Mara sat up too quickly, her head spinning. Tell him I'll be down in 5 minutes. She dressed in a panic, her fingers clumsy on buttons and laces. The clothes Elias had bought her were still unfamiliar, still felt like someone else's life. But they were warm and they fit, and that was more than she'd had in a long time. Downstairs, Elias waited in the small parlor. He looked like he hadn't slept at all. His eyes were shadowed, his face drawn, his clothes rumpled like he'd spent the night walking, but when he saw her, something eased in his expression. You look better, he said. I feel half dead. Mara crossed to where he stood by the window. You look worse. I didn't sleep. At all? Couldn't. He turned to look out at the street. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw... He stopped. It doesn't matter. What's done is done. Mara wanted to tell him it did matter, that killing a man, even a man like Cutler, left marks that didn't wash away. But she sensed he already knew that, sensed he was carrying something heavy and didn't want to share the weight yet. What happens now? She asked instead. Wade rode out at first light to verify Cutler's body. He'll be back tonight or tomorrow. After that, Elias shrugged. There'll be questions, an inquest probably. The territorial governor might get involved if anyone makes noise about it. Will they arrest you? Maybe. Wade seems inclined to believe our version of events, but the law's the law. I killed a man. Even if he deserved killing, there are consequences. He finally turned to face her fully, which is why you need to leave, today, before this gets complicated. Mara's stomach dropped. Leave? Go to Denver or Santa Fe. Somewhere far enough away that whatever happens here doesn't touch you. I've got money. Not much, but enough to get you started. You can... No. The word came out harder than she'd intended. I'm not running anymore, and I'm not letting you face this alone. Mara, you gave me back my life, Elias. The least I can do is stand beside you while you deal with the consequences of that. She stepped closer, forcing him to meet her eyes. Besides, they'll need my testimony. I'm a witness. I heard Cutler confess. I saw him try to kill us. You didn't murder him. You defended us both. And I'm going to make sure everyone knows that. Elias looked at her for a long moment, something complicated moving behind his eyes. Then he nodded slowly. All right. But if things go bad, if they decide to prosecute, you leave. You don't go down with me. We'll see about that when the time comes. Mara managed a weak smile. Have you eaten anything? No. Neither have I. Let's go find breakfast. Everything looks better on a full stomach. They walked to the small restaurant attached to the general store, both of them moving stiffly, bodies protesting yesterday's violence. The few townspeople they passed stared openly, their expressions ranging from curious to suspicious. News traveled fast in small towns. By now everyone in Granger Falls probably knew that Elias Calder had ridden into the mountains with a strange woman and come back with blood on his hands. Let them stare. Mara was done caring what people thought. The restaurant was warm and smelled like bacon and coffee. They sat at a corner table while a tired-looking waitress brought them plates piled with eggs and fried potatoes and thick slices of bread. Mara ate mechanically, forcing food down even though she had no appetite. Elias pushed his breakfast around his plate, but barely touched it. You need to eat, Mara said quietly. I'm not hungry. You need your strength. Whatever comes next, you'll need... I killed him. The words came out flat, brutal. I shot him 3 times. Shoulder, leg, heart. And I didn't feel anything. No regret, no guilt. Just satisfaction. Like I'd finally scratched an itch that had been bothering me for 4 years. Elias set down his fork. What does that make me? Human, Mara said. It makes you human. Cutler took everything from you. He deserved what he got. Maybe. But that doesn't change what I am now, what I've become. Elias looked at his hands like they belonged to someone else. I used to think I was a good man, an honest man. Now I don't know what I am. Mara reached across the table and covered his hands with hers. His skin was cold, rough with calluses. You're the man who believed me when no one else would. The man who gave me a reason to stop running. The man who made sure a killer couldn't hurt anyone else ever again. She squeezed his hands gently. Maybe that doesn't make you a saint, but it doesn't make you a monster either. Elias stared at their joined hands for a long moment. Then, very quietly, he said, Thank you. They sat like that in silence, connected by touch and shared understanding, while around them the restaurant filled with morning customers, and life carried on the way it always did. Finally, Elias pulled his hands away and picked up his fork again. He ate slowly, methodically, getting through half his breakfast before pushing the plate aside. I need to talk to Wade when he gets back. Make sure our stories match. Make sure we don't give them any reason to doubt what happened. Our stories will match because they're true. True and believable aren't always the same thing. Elias pulled out some coins and left them on the table. Come on, there's something I want to show you. They walked out of town, following a narrow path that climbed the hillside behind the church. The day was clear and cold, the kind of high-altitude winter morning that made everything sharp and crystalline. Mara's feet ached with every step, but she followed without complaint. After about 20 minutes, Elias stopped at a small cemetery surrounded by a weathered wooden fence. Most of the graves were old, the markers worn smooth by wind and time. But near the back, beneath a pine tree that still held some green, stood a newer headstone. Simple granite, carefully carved. Helen Calder, beloved wife. 1841 to 1864, gone but not forgotten. Mara felt her throat close. You brought me to see her grave. I thought... Elias stopped, started again. I thought you should know where she is. Thought maybe you'd want to... I don't know, say goodbye or something. Mara walked slowly to the grave and stood there, staring at the stone. 4 years. 4 years of running from this moment, from this place, from the truth of what she'd thought she'd done. And now here she was, standing at Helen's grave with the real story finally known. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry I ran. I'm sorry I left you. I'm sorry I didn't understand what was really happening." Tears were streaming down her face now, hot against her cold cheeks. "But I want you to know, we got him. Elias got him. He confessed to everything. He can't hurt anyone else now." The wind whispered through the pine branches. A crow called somewhere in the distance. The world kept turning, indifferent to human grief and human justice. Mara sank to her knees in the snow. "I wish I'd been braver. I wish I'd been stronger. I wish I could have saved you." She wouldn't have wanted you to die too. Elias's voice was soft behind her. She was the kind of person who always tried to protect others, even at cost to herself. If she'd known what would happen, she'd have sent you away, made you safe. She would have been glad you survived. How do you know? Because I knew her. Because, Elias's voice cracked. Because that's who she was. And because if our positions had been reversed, if I died and she'd lived, she would have done exactly what I did. She would have hunted Cutler down. She would have made him pay. She wouldn't have rested until justice was served. Mara looked up at him. "Did you love her very much?" "Yes." The answer was simple, absolute. More than I knew how to say. And when she died, I thought love died with her. That I'd never feel anything but emptiness again. He paused. I was wrong about that. Something in his tone made Mara's heart skip. "What do you mean?" But Elias had already turned away, walking back toward the cemetery gate. "We should get back to town. Wade will be returning soon." Mara stayed at the grave for another moment, her hand resting on the cold stone. "I won't run anymore," she promised. "I'll live the life you didn't get to have. I'll be brave. I'll be strong. I'll remember you always." Then she stood and followed Elias down the hillside. They spent the rest of the day in the boarding house parlor, staying out of sight while the town buzzed with speculation around them. The landlady brought them coffee and sandwiches at noon, her eyes bright with barely suppressed curiosity. But she didn't ask questions, and for that Mara was grateful. As the afternoon light began to fade, heavy footsteps sounded on the porch. The door opened and Marshal Wade entered, snow on his shoulders and exhaustion carved into every line of his face. "Found him," he said without preamble. "Right where you said he'd be. Dead from 3 gunshot wounds." His eyes moved between them. "Also found evidence of a fight, tracks in the snow. Blood trail showing he'd been hit and tried to move. Rifle about 10 yards from the body." He paused. "Matches your version of events." Elias nodded but said nothing. Wade pulled off his gloves slowly. "I also found something else. A cabin about a mile from where Cutler fell. Inside were documents, ledgers, lists of names and transactions." He pulled a folded paper from his coat, including a journal entry dated December 1864. Cutler's handwriting describes in detail how he planned to kill Helen Calder, how he'd been watching the house, how he intended to make it look like an accident. Mara's breath caught. He wrote it down? Seems he was proud of himself, wanted a record of his cleverness. Wade's expression was grim. "There are other entries too, other fires, other deaths. Cutler's been killing people for years, burning them out, making it look like accidents, all people who'd crossed him or cost him money." "Then you know we were telling the truth," Elias said. "I know Cutler was a murderer, and you stopped him. Whether you stopped him legally is another question." Wade sat down heavily in one of the parlor chairs. "I've sent word to the territorial governor. There'll have to be an official inquiry, but between the journal, the confession Miss Fielding witnessed, and the evidence at the scene, I don't think you'll face charges. Self-defense is self-defense, even when it's also revenge." Something loosened in Mara's chest. "So it's over?" "The legal part, probably. The rest—" Wade looked at Elias. "The rest you'll have to figure out on your own. Killing a man changes you, even when it's justified, even when he deserved it. You'll carry this for the rest of your life." "I know," Elias said quietly. I've been carrying Helen's death for 4 years. I think I can handle carrying Cutler's too. Wade stood. The inquiry will be in about a week. You'll both need to testify. Until then, stay in town. Don't give anyone reason to think you're running. He moved toward the door, then stopped. For what it's worth, I would have done the same thing. If someone had killed my wife, I'd have hunted them to the ends of the earth. The law might not approve, but I understand. After he left, silence filled the parlor. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the snow orange and gold. Somewhere in town, a dog barked. Life continuing, the world turning. We should celebrate, Mara said suddenly. We found the truth. We got justice. We're both alive. That's worth celebrating. Elias looked at her like she'd suggested flying to the moon. Celebrate? Yes, with dinner, and maybe whiskey, or wine if they have it. We've been eating trail food and cold sandwiches for days. We deserve a real meal. I don't know if I'm ready to... You don't have to be ready. You just have to show up. Mara stood, brushing off her skirt. Come on, the restaurant probably has something better than breakfast. And if people stare, let them stare. We've got nothing to hide. Elias hesitated, then slowly stood. All right, but just dinner, no whiskey. I need to keep my head clear. Fair enough. They walked back to the restaurant as twilight settled over Granger Falls. The place was busier now, filled with miners and ranchers who'd come in from the surrounding country for supplies and company. Every eye turned when they entered, conversations dropping to whispers. Mara lifted her chin and walked to a table near the window. Let them look. Let them wonder. She was done shrinking from attention. The waitress from that morning approached, her expression carefully neutral. What can I get you folks? Whatever's good tonight, Elias said. And coffee. Lots of coffee. The woman nodded and disappeared into the kitchen. Around them the whispers continued. Mara caught fragments. That's Calder and killed a man, and heard he shot him 3 times. But she ignored them all. Does it bother you? Elias asked quietly. The staring. Used to, not anymore. Mara looked at him across the table. I spent 4 years trying to be invisible, trying not to be noticed, trying to disappear. I'm tired of hiding. Let them stare. Let them talk. It doesn't change what happened. It doesn't change the truth. Something like admiration flickered in Elias's eyes. You've changed since that first night in the barn. You're different. I'm not running anymore. That makes a difference. The food came. Thick beef stew with fresh bread, apple pie for dessert, coffee so strong it could strip paint. They ate slowly, savoring every bite. It was the first real meal either of them had eaten in days, and it tasted like salvation. Halfway through dinner, a man approached their table. He was older, weathered, with kind eyes and work-roughened hands. Mr. Calder, I don't mean to intrude, but I wanted to say, what you did took courage. My brother lost his wife to one of Cutler's fires 3 years back. Never could prove it was him, but we all knew and couldn't do anything about it. He extended his hand. Thank you for making sure he couldn't hurt anyone else. Elias looked surprised, but shook the man's hand. I'm sorry about your sister-in-law. She was a good woman, deserved better than burning in her own home. The man nodded to both of them and walked away. After that, others came. Not everyone. Some people still looked at them with suspicion or disapproval, but enough. A woman whose son had been blinded by Cutler's poisoned whiskey. A rancher whose barn had burned under suspicious circumstances. A deputy who'd tried for years to build a case against Cutler and failed. By the time they finished eating, Mara realized something had shifted. Elias wasn't just a man who'd killed someone. He was a man who'd stopped a killer, who'd done what the law couldn't or wouldn't do, who'd brought justice to people who'd been waiting years for it. You're a hero, she said as they walked back to the boarding house. I'm not. I'm just a hero, Mara interrupted. To those people, to Helen, to me, you're a hero, whether you want to be or not. Elias was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I don't feel like a hero. I feel tired and empty, and like I've been carrying something heavy for so long I don't know what to do now that it's gone. You rest, you heal, you figure out what comes next. And what does come next? Mara didn't have an answer. They'd been so focused on finding Cutler, on getting justice, that neither of them had thought beyond that moment. Now justice was served and the killer was dead, and they were both standing in the cold mountain night with no plan and no purpose and no idea what they were supposed to do with the rest of their lives. "I don't know," she admitted, "but we'll figure it out, together." They reached the boarding house. Elias walked her to the door, then hesitated. "Thank you for staying, for not running when things got dangerous, for—" He struggled for words. "For being braver than I gave you credit for. Thank you for seeing me as something other than the scared girl who caused the fire, for believing I was worth saving." They stood there in the lamplight, close enough to touch but not touching, connected by everything they'd been through and everything they'd survived. Mara felt her heart beating hard against her ribs, felt the pull of something deeper than gratitude, stronger than shared grief. But this wasn't the time. Not yet. They were both too raw, too exhausted, too broken to build anything new on top of the rubble of the past few days. So she stepped back. "Good night, Elias." "Good night." She went inside and climbed the stairs to her room. Through the window, she watched him walk away down the darkened street, a solitary figure moving through pools of lamplight. And she wondered if maybe, when they'd both had time to heal, when the weight of everything had settled into something they could carry, maybe then there could be something more than survival between them. Maybe then there could be life. 3 days passed. The inquiry was scheduled for the end of the week, which gave them time to rest and recover and prepare their testimony. Mara spent most of her time in her room, sleeping more than she'd slept in years, letting her body heal from the abuse of the past 4 years. Her feet stopped bleeding. Her bruises faded from purple to yellow to gone. The cuts on her hands scabbed over and started to heal. Elias visited every day, bringing news from Wade or food from the restaurant or just sitting in the parlor in companionable silence. They didn't talk much about what had happened on the mountain. Didn't need to. The understanding between them ran deeper than words now. On the 4th day, a late winter storm rolled in. Snow fell thick and heavy, turning the world white and muffled. Mara stood at her window watching it come down, mesmerized by the silent beauty of it. A knock on her door. "It's me," Elias's voice. "Can I come in?" "Of course." He entered carrying a bundle wrapped in brown paper. "I brought you something." Mara took the package, curious. Inside was a dress, simple but well-made, dark blue wool with white cuffs and collar. "Elias, I can't. This is too much. You need proper clothes for the inquiry, and after that—" He stopped. "I thought you might want something that's actually yours, not borrowed, not someone else's." Tears stung Mara's eyes. "Thank you. There's something else." Elias pulled out a smaller package. Inside was a pair of leather gloves, lined with soft wool. "For after your hands finish healing. You didn't have to—" "I wanted to." He met her eyes. "Mara, I've been thinking about what happens after the inquiry. After all this is over." Her heart started beating faster. "And?" "My cabin's not much. Just 2 rooms and a barn, but it's warm and it's safe and it's far enough from town that no one bothers me." He took a breath. "You're welcome to stay there, if you want. Just until you figure out what you want to do next. No obligations, no expectations, just a place to rest, a place to start over." Mara stared at him. "You're offering me a home?" "I'm offering you a choice. You can stay or you can go. You can build a new life in Denver or Santa Fe or anywhere else. But if you want, if you need, a place to stop running and catch your breath, my door is open." "Why?" The question came out as a whisper. "Why would you do that for me?" Elias was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Because you gave me something I thought I'd lost. Purpose, direction, a reason to care about something other than my own grief." He stepped closer. "Because somewhere between finding you in my barn and watching Cutler fall, you stopped being the girl who worked for us and became something else, something important." "What?" Mara could barely breathe. "What did I become?" "I don't know yet. Friend, maybe. Companion. Someone I trust. Someone I—" He stopped, shook his head. "It's too soon to know what this is. Too soon to put words to it. We've both been through too much. But I know I don't want to lose you. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Mara felt like the floor had dropped away beneath her feet. Elias, you don't have to answer now. Think about it. Take all the time you need. He moved toward the door. The offer stands. No matter what. After he left, Mara stood in the middle of her room, holding the dress and the gloves, her mind spinning. A week ago, she'd been dying in the snow, convinced she deserved nothing but cold and darkness and death. Now she had choices, options, a future that extended beyond the next day or the next meal or the next place to hide. She could go to Denver, start fresh in a city where no one knew her, find work, build a life that had nothing to do with Elias Calder or Helen or the fire that had defined her for so long. Or she could stay, could accept Elias's offer, could see what grew between them when they weren't running or hunting or fighting for their lives. The thought terrified her, not because she didn't want it, but because she did. So much, so desperately it hurt. But wanting something and being ready for it weren't the same thing. Mara set down the packages and returned to the window. Outside, the snow was falling harder now, erasing tracks, covering mistakes, burying the past under layers of clean white silence. Maybe that was what they both needed. Time, space, a chance to let the snow fall and cover the blood and the ash and the memories. A chance to wake up one morning and discover that healing had happened while they weren't paying attention. And maybe, just maybe, when the snow melted and spring came and the world turned green again, they'd both be ready for whatever came next. Together. The inquiry lasted all day. Marshal Wade presented evidence, Cutler's journal, Helen's diary, testimony from people Cutler had victimized over the years. Mara and Elias both testified, telling their stories calmly and clearly. The territorial judge listened, asked questions, conferred with his advisors. By evening, the verdict came. Justifiable homicide, self-defense. No charges would be filed against Elias Calder. They walked out of the courthouse into cold twilight, both numb with relief. It was truly over now, legally, officially, finally over. What now? Mara asked. Elias looked at her, and she saw her own uncertainty reflected in his eyes. I don't know. I guess we figure out how to live again. Together? He smiled, small but genuine. If you'll have me. Mara took his hand. I'd like that. Very much. They stood together on the courthouse steps as night fell over Granger Falls, two people who'd been broken and lost and drowning in grief. Two people who'd found each other in the darkness and fought their way back to something like light. It wasn't the ending either of them had expected. It wasn't romance or passion or the kind of love songs got written about. But it was real. It was honest. It was earned through blood and fire, and 4 years of running toward and away from the truth. And as they walked together through the snow toward whatever came next, Mara realized that maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. The decision to leave Granger Falls came naturally, without discussion or debate. There was nothing holding them there except memories neither wanted to keep. 2 days after the inquiry, they loaded Solomon with supplies and rode north toward Elias's cabin, toward the place that would become home or wouldn't, toward a future written in snow and silence and the careful rebuilding of broken things. The journey took most of the day. They rode in companionable quiet, both lost in their own thoughts. The mountains rose around them, vast and indifferent, and Mara found herself thinking how strange it was that landscape could remain unchanged while everything human shifted and broke and reformed into new shapes. These same peaks had watched Helen die and Cutler fall, and two lost people find each other in the wreckage. The mountains didn't care. They simply endured. Maybe there was a lesson in that. As afternoon light began its slow slide toward evening, they crested a rise and Elias's cabin came into view. It sat in a small clearing surrounded by pines, smoke rising from the chimney into the cold air. The barn stood beside it, weathered but solid. Behind everything, the mountains climbed toward a sky so blue it hurt to look at. It's not much, Elias said, and Mara heard uncertainty in his voice. But it's sturdy, keeps the wind out, keeps a man warm through winter. It's beautiful, Mara said, and meant it. Not because the cabin was grand or impressive, but because it looked like safety, like permanence, like a place where someone could stop running and catch their breath. They dismounted, and Elias led Solomon into the barn while Mara walked slowly toward the cabin door. Her hand hesitated on the latch. This felt significant somehow, crossing this threshold. Like stepping through this door meant accepting something she couldn't take back. But hadn't she already accepted it? Days ago, standing in the boarding house while Elias offered her a choice? Or maybe even earlier, in the ruins of his old home, when they decided together to hunt down the truth no matter where it led. She pushed open the door and stepped inside. The cabin was exactly what Elias had described. 2 rooms divided by a simple partition, a stone fireplace that dominated one wall, rough furniture that looked handmade but serviceable. It smelled like wood smoke and coffee and solitude, a bachelor's space organized around function rather than comfort. But there was potential here. Mara could see it in the wide windows that let in good light, in the sturdy table that could seat 4 if needed, in the empty corners that waited for someone to fill them with life. Elias came in behind her carrying their supplies. "The bedroom's through there," he said, gesturing to the partition. "You can take it. I'll sleep out here by the fire." "Elias, I can't take your bed." "You can and you will. I've slept on harder surfaces than a floor." He set down the bags and moved to feed the fire. "Besides, it's only temporary, until spring, until you decide what you want to do next." There it was again, that assumption that this was temporary, that Mara would eventually leave. Maybe Elias believed it. Or maybe he was protecting himself, keeping his expectations low so he wouldn't be disappointed when she inevitably ran again. Mara wanted to tell him she wasn't going anywhere, that she'd finally found a place worth staying for. But the words felt too big, too soon. They'd need time to grow into this new shape of their lives. Rushing it would only break something fragile. So instead, she said, "Thank you for all of this." Elias nodded without turning around. "There's venison hanging in the cold cellar. I'll make stew. You should rest." She wanted to argue, to insist on helping, but exhaustion was pulling at her bones. The journey had taken more out of her than she'd realized. So she retreated to the small bedroom, lay down on the narrow bed that smelled like pine and cold air, and fell immediately into dreamless sleep. When she woke, the room was dark and something was cooking. Mara rose stiffly and padded out to the main room where Elias stood at the stove, stirring a pot that bubbled with rich, meaty smells. He'd lit several oil lamps, and their warm glow turned the rough cabin into something almost cozy. "What time is it?" she asked. "Near 8. You slept 4 hours." Elias glanced at her. "Hungry?" "Starving." They ate at the table, bowls of thick stew and hunks of bread Elias had somehow produced. The food was simple but good, and Mara found herself eating with real appetite for the first time in weeks. Across from her, Elias ate mechanically, his mind clearly elsewhere. "What are you thinking about?" Mara asked. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I keep expecting to wake up and find this was all a dream, find out you're not real, that I'm still alone in this cabin, still drowning in grief, still stuck in the same day over and over. I'm real. I know, rationally I know, but it's hard to trust it, hard to believe that anything good can come from something that started with so much pain." He set down his spoon. "I spent 4 years convincing myself I was fine alone, that I didn't need anyone, that wanting anything beyond survival was weakness, and now you're here and I don't know how to—" He stopped, frustrated. "I don't know how to do this." "Do what?" "This, connection, caring about someone again, letting myself hope for something beyond just getting through another winter." Elias looked at her, and his eyes were full of something raw and uncertain. "What if I'm no good at it anymore? What if I've been alone too long?" Mara reached across the table and took his hand. "Then we'll figure it out together. Because I don't know how to do this either. I don't know how to stop waiting for everything to fall apart. I don't know how to trust that I deserve good things. But maybe if we're both stumbling through it, it'll be easier." Elias's fingers tightened around hers. Maybe. They sat like that while the fire crackled and the wind whispered outside and the night deepened around them. 2 damaged people holding on to each other like lifelines, hoping that connection was enough to keep them both afloat. The days settled into a rhythm. Elias worked, chopping wood, tending to Solomon, maintaining the cabin and barn against the relentless assault of winter. Mara slowly took over the household tasks, cooking and cleaning and organizing the chaos of a man who'd been living without purpose. At first she asked permission for everything, afraid of overstepping, but Elias seemed relieved to have someone else making decisions about domestic matters, and gradually she stopped asking. They were careful with each other in those first weeks. Polite, considerate, like two animals circling, not quite sure if the other was friend or threat. They talked about safe things, the weather, the supplies they'd need before spring, whether Solomon needed new shoes. They didn't talk about Helen or Cutler or the future or the strange, complicated thing growing between them. But slowly, gradually, the careful distance began to shrink. It started small. Elias teaching Mara to split wood properly, standing behind her to guide her swing, his hands warm over hers. Mara mending a tear in Elias's coat, her fingers learning the shape of him through fabric and thread. Shared coffee in the morning darkness before the sun rose. Evenings by the fire where conversation came easier, where laughter occasionally broke through the careful restraint. 3 weeks after they'd returned to the cabin, a blizzard hit. It came fast and furious, wind screaming down from the peaks, and snow falling so thick that the world disappeared into white. They were trapped inside for 3 days, watching through frosted windows as the storm raged. On the second day, restless and cabin-fevered, Mara started going through Elias's meager collection of books. Most were practical, farming manuals, veterinary guides, a battered almanac. But at the bottom of the crate she found a small leather volume she recognized immediately. Helen's journal, the one they'd recovered from the ruins. Mara pulled it out carefully, like it might shatter. "Have you read this? Since we found it?" Elias looked up from the harness he was mending, his expression closed. "No." "Why not?" "Because I'm afraid of what it'll say. Afraid of finding out she was scared at the end, or in pain, or—" He stopped. "Some things are better left unknown." "Or maybe," Mara said gently, "some things need to be known so we can finally let them go." She opened the journal to a random page and began reading aloud. Helen's voice came through in the careful script, observations about weather and household matters, funny stories about travelers who'd stopped at the stagehouse, small moments of joy found in everyday life. Mara read for an hour, occasionally pausing when emotion caught in her throat. Elias listened without interrupting, his hand still on the harness, his eyes distant. When Mara reached the final entries, the ones documenting Helen's fear of Cutler, Elias finally spoke. "Stop, please." Mara closed the journal. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have—" "No, you should have. I need to hear it, need to know." Elias set aside the harness and moved to sit beside her on the floor near the fire. "But I need you to understand something first." "What?" "I loved Helen, loved her completely. She was everything good in my life, and when she died, part of me died too." He looked at Mara, and his eyes were full of complicated truth. "But that doesn't mean I'm not capable of loving again. It doesn't mean that I haven't already started." He stopped, unable or unwilling to finish the thought. Mara's heart was pounding so hard she thought he must be able to hear it. "Started what?" "Caring about you. More than I should. More than is probably wise." Elias laughed, bitter and self-deprecating. "I told myself it was just gratitude, just shared grief. But it's more than that. Has been for a while now. And it feels like betraying Helen. Like I'm not allowed to feel anything for anyone else while she's still in your heart," Mara finished softly. "But Elias, she'll always be in your heart, always. That doesn't go away just because you care about someone new. It doesn't make what you had with her less real. Then why does it feel like I'm choosing, like I can't have both?" "Because you're human. Because grief is complicated. Because—" Mara took a breath. "Because you're scared. The same way I'm scared. We're both scared of wanting something and losing it again." Elias stared at the fire. "Are you scared?" "Terrified." Mara's voice dropped to a whisper. "I spent 4 years convinced I didn't deserve to be loved, didn't deserve to be happy, and now you're offering me both and I don't know how to accept it without waiting for it all to go wrong. What if it doesn't go wrong? Then we'd have something worth keeping, something worth fighting for." She turned to face him fully. But it has to be what we both want, not just convenience or loneliness or shared trauma. It has to be real. It is real. Elias reached out and touched her face, his calloused fingers gentle against her cheek. At least it is for me. Has been since, I don't even know when. Maybe since that night in the ruins when you cried and I held you. Maybe since before that. But it's real, Mara. Terrifying and confusing and completely real. Mara leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. I care about you too. So much it scares me. Then maybe we can be scared together. Maybe that's enough to start with. He kissed her then, soft and tentative, like he was afraid she might break. Mara kissed him back, tasting coffee and sadness and hope all mixed together. It wasn't passionate or desperate. It was careful, honest, a promise of something that might grow if they gave it time and space and patience. When they pulled apart, both breathing hard, Elias rested his forehead against hers. I don't know how to do this. Don't know the rules. Then we'll make them up as we go. Mara smiled, small but genuine. No expectations, no rushing, just being together, seeing what grows. I can do that. They sat together by the fire as the storm raged outside, holding each other loosely, carefully, like they were both made of glass. And for the first time in 4 years, Mara felt something she'd thought was lost forever. Peace. Winter slowly released its grip. The snow began to melt, revealing dead grass and mud and the patient earth beneath. Ice broke on the creek with sounds like gunshots. Birds returned, tentative at first, then in greater numbers. The world was waking up. And so were they. The relationship between Mara and Elias deepened gradually, organically, like ice melting. Not all at once, but in steady increments. They moved from sleeping in separate rooms to falling asleep together by the fire. From careful distance to comfortable closeness, from formal politeness to easy intimacy. There were still hard days. Days when Elias withdrew into himself, haunted by memories Mara couldn't reach. Days when Mara woke from nightmares of fire and smoke, and had to be reminded where she was, who she was with, that she was safe. But they learned to weather those days together, offering comfort without demanding explanations, giving space without abandoning. One morning in early spring, Mara woke to find Elias already up and dressed. Come with me, he said. I want to show you something. They rode Solomon together to a place Mara had never been, a meadow tucked into a fold of the mountains, protected from wind, facing south to catch maximum sun. The snow was nearly gone here, and the first wildflowers were pushing through the soil, purple and yellow and white, brave and impossibly fragile. This is where I'm going to build, Elias said. Build what? A house, a real house, not just a cabin, with a porch and multiple bedrooms and windows that catch the morning light. He dismounted and helped Mara down. I bought this land years ago. Helen and I talked about building here. We'd made plans, drawn sketches, but after she died, I couldn't bring myself to do it alone. And now? Now I think maybe I could, if I wasn't alone. He turned to face her, and his eyes were clear and steady. Mara Fielding, I'm not asking you to marry me. Not yet. It's too soon, and we both have too much healing left to do. But I am asking you to build a life with me, here, in this place, to take whatever this thing between us is and see if we can make it last. Mara felt tears threatening. You're sure? You're sure you want that? I've never been more sure of anything. Elias took her hands. You brought me back to life. You gave me a reason to care about tomorrow, and I think Helen would approve. I think she'd want us both to be happy, to find joy in the ashes. I think she would too. Mara squeezed his hands. Yes, I want to build a life with you. I want to stay. Elias pulled her close, holding her like she was something precious. Then let's start planning. Let's figure out what we want this life to look like. They spent the morning walking the meadow, imagining where rooms would go, where they'd plant a garden, where the barn would stand. They talked about the future in concrete terms for the first time, about crops they'd grow, animals they'd raise, maybe children someday if they were blessed. It felt like planting seeds, like putting down roots after years of drifting. As they rode back to the cabin, Mara said, "We should visit Helen's grave, both of us, together." Elias tensed slightly. Why? Because we need to say goodbye properly. Not to forget her, never that, but to acknowledge that we're moving forward, that we're building something new that's separate from what came before. Mara leaned back against him. She deserves to know that her death wasn't meaningless, that it led to something good, even though it shouldn't have happened at all. Elias was quiet for a long time. Then he nodded. "You're right. When the road's clear enough for travel, we'll go." 2 weeks later, they made the journey to Granger Falls. The town had changed since winter, busier now, full of prospectors and settlers heading west, following rumors of gold or land or new beginnings. No one paid much attention to Elias and Mara anymore. They were old news, yesterday's drama, already fading into story. They climbed to the cemetery on the hillside. The pine tree above Helen's grave was in full green now, its branches swaying in the spring wind. Someone, probably Elias on a previous visit, had cleared away the winter debris. The stone stood clean and white in the sunlight. Mara hung back, letting Elias approach first. She watched as he knelt beside the grave, his hand resting on the stone. His lips moved, but she couldn't hear what he said. Private words, between a man and the wife he'd lost. After a while, he beckoned her forward. Mara knelt beside him, her hand joining his on the stone. "I'm sorry I didn't save you," she said softly. "I'm sorry I ran. But I'm trying to honor your memory by living well, by not wasting the life you tried to protect." "She'd like that," Elias said. "She'd like you. Would have liked you, I mean. If you'd known each other as adults." He smiled, sad but genuine. "You're both stubborn, both strong, both kinder than the world deserved." "Are we going to be all right?" Mara asked. "Even with her between us?" "She's not between us. She's—" Elias struggled for words. "She's part of the foundation, part of what brought us together, part of why I can love again, because she taught me how." He turned to look at Mara. "I'll always love her. But I love you too. And those two things don't cancel each other out. They can coexist." Mara felt tears streaming down her face. "I love you too. I didn't mean to, didn't plan to, but I do." "Good." Elias pulled her close. "Because I'm going to need help building that house. And someone has to make sure I eat regularly. And," his voice caught, "and I don't want to be alone anymore." "You won't be, ever again." They stayed at the grave for another hour, talking to Helen like she could hear them, telling her about their plans, asking for her blessing even though they knew she couldn't give it. But somehow, speaking the words out loud made them real, made the future they were planning feel possible. As they walked back down the hillside, Mara said, "What should we call the house? The new house in the meadow?" Elias thought about it. "Not sure, something that honors where we've been, but looks toward where we're going." "Forged by fire?" He laughed. "Too dramatic." "New beginnings?" "Too sentimental." "Then you pick." Elias was quiet until they reached Solomon. Then he said, "Phoenix House. The bird that rises from ashes. Seems appropriate." "Phoenix House," Mara repeated, testing the words. "I like it." "Then that's what we'll call it." They rode back toward the mountains, toward the cabin that was temporary, toward the meadow where they'd build something permanent. And with every mile, the weight of the past grew lighter. Construction began in late spring. Elias hired help from town, carpenters and masons who asked few questions and worked hard. Mara supervised the garden, planting vegetables and herbs and flowers in neat rows. The meadow transformed slowly from wild to cultivated, from empty to purposeful. On the summer solstice, when the days were longest and the sun seemed reluctant to set, Elias found Mara in the half-finished house. She stood in what would become the main room, looking out through an unfinished window toward the mountains. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything. Nothing. How strange it is that a year ago I was dying in the snow, and now I'm here. How lucky we are." She turned to face him. "How much I want this to last." "It will last. We'll make sure of it." Elias crossed to her, pulling something from his pocket. "I have something for you." It was a bracelet, a simple red cord woven with intricate knots. "It's beautiful. Mara said. What does it mean? It's a Calder family tradition. My grandmother taught it to me when I was young. The red cord is a vow, a promise that you're choosing someone for life, for partnership, for whatever comes. Elias took her hand. I know we said we wouldn't rush, that we'd take our time, but I also know I don't want to spend another day without you knowing how I feel, how committed I am to this, to us. Tears blurred Mara's vision. Are you asking? I'm asking you to be my wife. Not today, not this month, but someday. When you're ready. When we've both healed enough to stand before the world and make promises we can keep. He tied the cord around her wrist, his fingers gentle. But I'm also telling you that in my heart, the choice is already made. You're already mine. If you'll have me. Yes, Mara whispered. Yes, I'll have you. I'll marry you. I'll spend the rest of my life with you. Elias pulled her into his arms, and they stood together in the half-built house while the sun set and the mountains turned gold and purple, and the world held its breath in that perfect moment between day and night. We're going to be happy, Mara said. Aren't we? Yes, we're going to work for it, fight for it, choose it every day. But yes, we're going to be happy. And somehow, despite everything they'd been through, despite all the pain and grief and loss, Mara believed him. The house was finished by autumn. They held a small gathering to celebrate. Wade and his wife, a few families from town, some of the men who'd helped with construction. It wasn't grand or elaborate, just neighbors sharing food and stories and welcoming two people back into the community of the living. As the sun set on that warm September evening, Elias stood on the porch of Phoenix House and raised his cup. To Helen, he said, who taught me how to love and who, I think, would approve of what we've built here. To Helen, the gathered people echoed. Then Mara raised her own cup. To new beginnings, to choosing life even after loss, to the family we make from the ashes of the one we lost. To new beginnings. They drank and laughed, and as darkness fell, someone produced a fiddle and someone else a harmonica, and impromptu music filled the meadow. Couples danced on the grass, children ran shrieking through the twilight, and for a few hours the world was nothing but joy. Later, after everyone had gone home and the stars were brilliant overhead, Elias and Mara stood together on their porch, and looked out at the life they were building. Do you think we'll have children? Mara asked. Maybe. If we're blessed, would you want them? I think so. Not right away, but someday. She leaned against him. I want to fill this house with life, with laughter, with all the things Cutler tried to destroy. Then that's what we'll do. Elias kissed the top of her head. We'll live so well that Helen's death wasn't for nothing. We'll build something beautiful from something terrible. We'll prove that love is stronger than hate. And when people ask how we found each other, we'll tell them the truth, that you appeared beside my horse in the dead of winter, that you whispered a name no one else remembered, that you gave me back my purpose. Elias turned her to face him, and that despite everything, despite fire and death and 4 years of grief, we found a way to be happy. Mara looked up at the man she'd chosen, the man who'd chosen her back, the man who'd seen her at her worst and loved her anyway. What's next? She asked. After we're married? After we've settled into this life? Whatever we want. Maybe I'll teach Valley children to read, the way you talked about doing. Maybe we'll expand the farm. Maybe we'll just exist, quietly and contentedly, growing old together. Elias smiled. As long as we're together, the specifics don't matter much. Together, Mara repeated. I like the sound of that. They went inside, closing the door on the night and the past and everything that had tried to break them. Inside Phoenix House, lamps glowed warm and welcoming. The furniture they'd chosen together sat in comfortable arrangements. Books lined newly built shelves. A sampler Mara had been working on, their names and the date intertwined with flowers, hung above the mantel. It looked like a home. It felt like a future. And as they climbed the stairs to the bedroom they now shared, Mara thought about the girl she'd been a year ago, terrified, guilty, convinced she deserved nothing but punishment. That girl was gone, burned away like everything else in the fire. In her place stood a woman who knew her own strength, who understood that survival wasn't enough, You had to fight for Joy, who believed finally that she deserved to be loved. Thank you, she whispered to Helen, wherever she was. Thank you for protecting me. Thank you for believing I was innocent. Thank you for leading Elias to find me so we could save each other. No answer came. The dead don't speak, no matter how much we wish they would. But Mara thought she felt something, a warmth, a presence, a sense of approval. Maybe it was real. Maybe it was just wishful thinking. Either way, it was enough. Elias took her hand as they entered the bedroom. Second thoughts? Not a single one. Good. Neither do I. They lay down together in their bed in their house in their meadow, two people who'd been forged by fire and chosen by love, two people who'd learned that the path to happiness sometimes led through hell. But they'd walked that path and emerged on the other side, scarred but whole, broken but healing. And as Mara drifted towards sleep, safe in Elias's arms, she thought about the sign he'd carved for the front gate, the one he'd shown her that afternoon, grinning like a boy with a secret. Phoenix House, forged by fire, chosen by love. It wasn't just the name of a building, it was the truth of their lives. It was the story they'd lived and the future they were claiming. It was everything they'd lost and everything they'd found. It was, Mara realized with a clarity that made her breath catch, exactly where she was meant to be. I love you, she whispered into the darkness. I love you too, Elias whispered back. Always. And in the morning, when the sun rose over the mountains and light poured through their windows, they would wake together. They would eat breakfast in the kitchen they'd designed together. They would walk hand in hand through the garden they'd planted together. They would live the life they'd built from ashes and grief and the stubborn, impossible belief that happiness was worth fighting for. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, they simply held each other. Two people who'd been lost and were now found. Two people who'd been broken and were now healing. Two people who'd been alone and were now, finally, irrevocably, beautifully together. The fire in the hearth burned low. Outside, the wind whispered through the aspens. The mountains stood guard over the meadow. And in Phoenix House, built on the ruins of everything that came before, two people slept peacefully. The running was over. The hiding was done. The guilt was laid to rest. What remained was life. Glorious, complicated, hard-won life. And they would live it well. Together, they had stepped into a future not built on ashes but on the courage to love again, the strength to forgive themselves, and the wisdom to know that some endings are really beginnings in disguise. The red cord on Mara's wrist caught the last light of the dying fire. A promise made, a vow kept, a love forged in the crucible of grief and tempered by hope. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.